Hello and welcome to the Open Air Podcast. My name is Devang Desai and I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Simon Bushell. Bush, how goes it, sir?
It's going very, very well. It is extraordinarily hot in Vancouver this time of year, and I was out on the tennis courts yesterday, and I realized something that I should have realized a long time ago, that tennis courts hold heat incredibly well. So I was sweating profusely whilst trying to hit some forehands across the net.
How much water did you bring with you is the question I will ask now.
Fortunately enough for where we play, me and my hitting partner, there is a fountain at the edge of the tennis court, which makes a substantial difference. Otherwise, I'd be bringing liters upon liters of water with me.
Among the many things I'm envious of professional tennis players, it's the accessibility to a wide variety of sports drinks, random drinks, the things they have with them when they sit down, just to have that ability to have anything you want. I feel like it would make you play better.
Sure, let's go with that. Seems reasonable.
on to this week. Now, Simon, we're touching on a topic close to your heart. It's a very cool thing to talk about, I think, as well, because it's kind of the mechanics of the game that rarely get discussed. And we have probably the perfect guest to talk about it.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think through this period of time, we've looked back at a bunch of different things that have happened through tennis history, amazing matches. And one that really stood out to me was Gustavo Kuerten winning in 1997 at the French Open. And it really was famous for something that's really quite mundane in a lot of ways. It was a change of strings. I mean, Kuerten is amazing. Kuerten is amazing in so many different ways just because of his talent alone. But technological improvements in tennis are things that we've touched on before, but never really gone into a lot of depth about. So I figured it would be a really good episode to invite Jonas Eriksson on for. Jonas Eriksson, also known as the Tennisnerd. So thank you very much for joining us, Jonas.
Thanks a lot for having me. It's a very interesting topic to talk about. So I really looking forward.
Do you want to give us just a quick background of what Tennisnerd is and what kind of stuff you cover?
Yeah, I mean, it started back in 10 or 12, so quite some years ago in today's online world. And I've always been a tennis nerd. I used to just walk around swinging air swings in people's stomachs when I was a little boy. So I played tennis up until I was maybe 9, 10, and then I started doing other sports for a while, and then I came back to the sport, and the passion was bigger than ever, I would say. And I'm a kind of school journalist, always loved writing about stuff that I care about. So I started Tennisnerd, and the idea was more to write about whatever news and other things in the tennis world. But I was also playing a lot of tennis, and I was testing a lot of rackets, and I noticed how much the racket and the string affected the sensation while playing, and also kind of my performance in a way, although you shouldn't be switching too much. But and that kind of led me down a rabbit hole of a lot of specs and tech and different racket and strings and tensions, and it's kind of an endless topic. And on the top levels of tennis, it's down to a gram. So I got really interested in that, started reading up, started testing, started talking to, stringers and tennis people. And then it kind of took off after that. And I started YouTube in 2017. And since then, it's just been growing and growing. So the website has been around for a while, but in the last few years, I've really put more time into it. And now it's been, I'm getting a lot of response, which is it's really a lot of fun. And I'm connecting with tennis lovers and tennis nerds all over the world, really, every week and every day. So I get loads of messages, and I consult players on what racket and strings they should play with to maximize their game and get more out of it. So it's good. It's fun to be able to work with your passion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we can both speak to the fact that we've learned a lot about what pro players use and the setups they use, specifically talking about these historical matches. It's been fun to watch some of your videos about different setups that players have had through the year. I remember specifically an example that we had talking about David Nalbandian and the racket that he used. You made a video on that. I believe it was last year, maybe this year. And we did an episode on Nalbandian a couple of months ago. That racket is incredible. I don't know how anyone swings that. Speaking as someone who uses a fairly heavy racket with a fairly high swing weight, it's astonishing, Jonas, that Nalbandian can even swing that thing.
Yeah, he has, I think almost, especially on the backhand side, close to kind of perfect timing on his shots. And I don't know. I mean, looking at the swing weights, they're generally going down even for pro players these days. So I think even some pros would wonder how he got that thing moving, and he's able to kind of connect with the ball so cleanly over and over again with such a hefty racket, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to 1997, and I want to just do a quick whistle-stop tour of technology in tennis, if you can help me out with it, Jonas. I'm going to read a quote from Steve Tignor just to lead us off here. He wrote an article about the 20th year anniversary of Kuerten winning at the French Open, quoted him saying, "While Kuerten went on to win 3 French Open, his Parisian story wasn't all about love. It was also about something much duller, polyester, not clothes, but strings, as he slid and smiled his way through Roland Garros. Kuerten had a new weapon inside of his head frame, a purple string called Luxolon Original, not Element, that's a different string. This ultra stiff thread made from polyester-like material gave him the freedom to swing as hard as he wanted, while also creating the topspin needed to keep the ball in. 19 years after the debut of the oversized racket, tennis equipment had taken its next evolutionary step." So I think most people know about the origins of tennis rackets, which are, you see the wooden ones, you see it in the old time movies, and I think you see them still used very, very periodically in sort of mock gestures from people in photos of people making fun of people who used to use wooden rackets. You did swing a wooden racket in a video a little while ago. How was it to hit with it?
It was easier than I thought, but still bloody difficult. It was that's the thing. I tried it maybe a year before that, and I hadn't played as much tennis because I'd been injured at that time. So, and then it was almost impossible. You know, I couldn't get a clean ball in. And now that I've been playing a lot more and getting back in shape and everything, moving better on the court, it was really enjoyable. But it does tire you out after about 45 minutes. You know, you're swinging that 400-gram racket, and the sweet spot is tiny, and it's very flexible, so all the natural power comes from the weight, not so much from the stiffness of the racket. So you need to generate a lot of power yourself. You need to really have a perfect swing. But as a kind of warm-up racket, to get your contact point well in front and to make sure you hit it in the middle of the string bed, I think it's kind of an underrated tool. I think some good juniors and other players could really benefit from trying one once in a while, because you really get that, you know, timing and the sweet spot down to a science with that racket. But I wouldn't recommend anyone using it today. It's too difficult.
Devang, have you ever swung a wooden racket? I'm assuming you haven't, but you never know.
A couple times. My dad and my uncles had a few laying around, but I mean, as Jonas said, like the margin for error is basically zero, and the vibration is it's pretty shocking. But I would love to see, I know these hypothetical situations are put out there, but wouldn't it be fun to see an EXO with the top guys using some of the older rackets for like a set? Like, I wonder what we would see.
It would be incredible, wouldn't it? It'd be really interesting. Somehow we can make it happen, right? Maybe when the ETP comes back, they'll put it on the list of potential things to try and drive more interest in the sport.
the next iterate, like I guess the next development is probably the metal racket, right, Bush, or the T2000 from Jimmy Connors and Wilson. Yeah,
and I think Jonas, in a wooden racket originally, are they still putting natural gut in those? Are they putting natural gut strings?
Yeah, I mean that was the string back then, before anything else existed, and a very expensive, laborsome process to create. It's made out of cow intestines, so it's still around. Today. Federer uses it, Murray, Djokovic, but they use it in a hybrid with these strings that we're going to talk about that Kuerten kind of brought onto the game. So, but back then you had no real other choice than to go with natural gut string, and it still is the best at maintaining tension, even with today's technology and advancements in strings. It's still the best at maintaining the tension. The tension doesn't really drop after the stringing.
So we went from wooden rackets, as Devang mentioned, Jimmy Connors pioneers it in the 70s, that we go to metal, natural gut and nylon strings, I assume, are still very prominently used during this period of time. We then sort of make the natural switch to graphite, lighter rackets, more stable in some ways, more... what's the correct phrasing here? More repeatable. You know what you're going to get. It's a bit more predictable, a graphite racket than a metal racket. oversized heads. And I think Andre Agassi is probably famous for this. You see him using a much bigger head during the 90s. That is a very whistle-stop tour. And I think if you're interested in it, Jonas has some very interesting videos to go back and look at some traditional frames that have been used throughout the years. And I want to just come on quickly to poly strings. So, Jonas, can you just give us a brief overview of what going from, let's say, a nylon or a natural gut to a poly string, what does it enable a player to do, and how did it change the game?
Yeah, well, the poly string can be quite harsh on your arm and elbow and wrist, but it has the huge benefit of you being able to hit really hard without the string moving too much and staying out of place. They will move, but they will then snap back into place, which will help with spin generation. So you will get a lot more top spin. You will be able to brush up on the ball a lot more. Much like Sergei Bruguera is very good at really brushing up and creating huge amounts of top spin. So you can create a lot more top spin, which will allow you bigger margin for error, and it will also be able to control the ball a lot more. So with it's really changed the game quite a bit. So with the graphite, you could create lighter rackets, you create bigger rackets. And then if you add this string, you have the benefit of a huge string bed, and then you can also make it controllable thanks to this string. So it was really a game changer compared to perhaps what's happened in racket technology.
I think an interesting note on this one was that when poly strings came around, Luxolon, it's very funny, they also made bra straps, and it was one of the precursors to this becoming I don't know what methodology.
I would love to be in the boardroom when that meeting was held. They're like, okay, guys, it's time to branch out. We know exactly where we're going with this. We have the technology. Let's do it.
It was a strong pivot from them, I think.
So I think also another interesting note on this one is that those poly strings in the early 90s, mostly used by much lower ranked players on the Challenger Tour, simply because of cost. And it's one thing that we don't really consider in the sport, right? You always think of the great levelers that in technological terms, really in tennis, you just need racket and strings. It's not the same as maybe like hockey equipment or something where you need a lot of stuff in order to be really, really successful. But in tennis terms, it can get really bloody expensive, can it not, to own lots of rackets, especially ones during that period of time where it was much more expensive to buy top-end graphite rackets and also to be stringing it with natural gut. It must have cost a fortune if you were ranked 400 in the world and making a living on the Challenger circuit. And I think that was an interesting thing to consider. And it's one maybe we should think about more in terms of what that looks like for our lower ranked players.
Well, the durability really helps as well. So you won't be with natural gut. It's much easier to break them. They're much more prone to breaking due to humidity, and you can't let it rain on them too much. So with the new polyester strings, they really open up also for kind of lower ranked players, and to keep just bring a reel and string your own rackets or get someone cheap stringer to string them, and you save a lot of money.
Just looking at the setup at the major tournaments and the stringing hubs on location that are running through thousands of rackets a day, and obviously the top players have access to this kind of stuff. But I would wonder, like a 400th ranked player in the world who got into it through the qualies probably has never had the ability to get their rackets like the full treatment, right? At this often of an interval. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I would say, the thing with being, even today, if you're a low ranked player, you don't, the top players, they bring their own stringer. Obviously they have their whole team of the physios and whatnot, and trainers and hitting partners. But they also, like Fed and Novak, those guys, they bring their own stringer because they want the same consistent string job all the time. Then in tournaments, they provide a stringing service at a low cost, relatively low cost, but you might get a not great stringer if it's a small tournament. Some players, they need to save money, so there's stories when for example, Dustin Brown, he used to bring a stringing machine in his van, and he used to string for other players just to get some extra money, and it shows really the drastic contrasts of being a top 10 player and just being there, which is not so far down the list really if you're 300, 500. But you can't even imagine how much less money they're making. So you have to find all these small tricks to make your ends meet.
Let's move on to 1997 and let's look at our feature participants in who we're talking about specifically in the French Open final. Let's start with Sergi Bruguera. Jonas, I saw Serendipity Strikes that you made a video on Sergi Bruguera just this past week talking about the racket that he used. How was it to swing the racket that he played with?
That racket is pretty good. It's not so far detached from what we use today. It's a bit heavier. It's a lot more flexible, so it's almost resembling a wooden racket, although it's made out of graphite. The head size is not puny. It's 95 square inches, and they still sell 95 square inch rackets, although they're becoming kind of a rarity on the lower level tour players, although some pros still use them for sure. So it's not really like a relic in terms of being difficult to use. You do feel like the flexing of the racket is rare today. You don't find as many rackets that flex, that have that sensation of vibration, and that it does. But it's definitely a racket you could give to a good player, and they could play a good tournament with it. So it wasn't, and it was called at that time. It was called the Spin Doctor. So it's has a really open string bed that will help the player generate more spin on his shots. And Bruguera was a player that really could take advantage of that, of course, because he had his very spin focused game.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that during the period of play that Bruguera was active, he was pretty much a clay court god. Devang, what do you know about him? I know he's a little before our time in terms of when we were growing up and being a part of. And he's not actually someone who's spoken of a whole lot. It's a shame in a lot of ways that Rafael Nadal has basically sort of hoovered up any conversation about who is the greatest clay courter of all time, because Sergi Bruguera is right up there as someone who is an all-time great clay courter. He is an amazing defensive player watching him, and the revolutions that he gets on the ball is quite extraordinary.
It's funny. I think the first memory I have is losing to Andre in the gold medal match in Atlanta. So that's 96. And that's like probably after maybe the peak of him winning a couple slam titles. But you're right. It was a bit before my time, but my dad talked about the Spin Doctor all the time. And he talked about Bruguera having a crazy racket. So I definitely remember that growing up. But I think for me, it was the fact that he was in this conversation on clay only. He was skipping Wimbledon, right? Like he didn't even attempt to play outside of his forte.
It's amazing looking back at those, and they talk about it in commentary during this match as well, about how it's considered an honor basically when a player who is reaching the latter stages of the French Open commits to go and play at Wimbledon the following week. How times have changed, have they not? It seems, and maybe in some ways, Jonas, technology is to play with that. Maybe it is a little easier with the tech that's available to the top players to make that transition to go from clay to grass.
Yeah, I think that definitely helps. Also, I mean, the court speed has, as they've over the years, they've seemed to have equalized the kind of sensation and the bounce of playing tennis on different surfaces, especially on the ATP tour. So grass used to be, really low bouncing balls, a lot of bad bounces when the grass wasn't that good. And clay court is obviously high bounces and a completely different ball game in a way. And that's probably why like these clay court specialists exist, and that they don't feel at home at all on grass courts because it's such a different game. Nowadays, I mean, the grass is thicker and the ball bounces up higher. They have used the same equipment, which kind of equalizes as well. So it's like polyester strings, graphite frames, and I think they also work more on movement and are generally probably more fit as well. So they need to. They know that Wimbledon is such a huge thing, although it's only the grass court season is quite short. So I think it's important for most tennis players these days to learn how to play grass court tennis, although it's a little bit different from tennis on hard courts or clay.
So Bruguera is the 1993 and 1994 French Open champion. He also is infamous for a very rare triple bagel, which occurred against Thierry Campion in 1993. I believe he's still the last player to have triple bageled someone at a Grand Slam level. Thomas Muster also very much prominent at this period of time. He sort of takes over a little bit of the mantle of the King of Clay in 1995. Bruguera is sort of up and down. As you mentioned, Devang, he loses in the final of the Olympic tournament to Andre Agassi, who wins gold. Still no shame to win a silver medal. So coming into this tournament in 1990...
on a hard court.
On a hard court, yeah. I mean, absolutely.
On a hard, like randomly. It's like, okay, yeah, sure, I'll make the final here. Why not?
He's definitely a contender going into this tournament in 97. He has a little bit of... He has ankle problems, which I think sort of stick with him the rest of his career as well. And it's pretty serious if you go back and read about what actually happened. I think he ruptured ligaments in his ankle, which is not a good thing for a tennis player to have. So that's Sergi Bruguera. I'm trying to cover everything as quickly as possible so we can get into this match. Let's talk about Kuerten very quickly, because he's much more simple to cover at this period of time. Kuerten's really, really young at this period, and he is a pretty good junior player. But at this point in time, he's still quite young and he's still making his way in the game in 1997. He has a losing record, which gets pointed out in commentary going into the French Open 97. He wins the previous week in Brazil. He plays a challenger tournament, and he's still the only player to ever win a challenger tournament the previous week and then go on and win a Grand Slam the following week. That's a very bizarre storyline.
I don't think that's going to be done again. I'm comfortable saying Guga is the only person that will be able to do that ever.
The storyline goes that he has only started using L'Axalon Original 6 months prior to the start of this French Open. Jonas, just put into context, I know how meticulous top pros are about their equipment. And I know there was sort of that big blow up a few years ago when either Novak upped or dropped his swing weight very slightly, and it caused him to have a little bit of a breakdown for a couple of months while he was still trying to figure that stuff out. So can you just put into context what, for a top player to only be using a new piece of equipment for 6 months, it's a pretty astonishing achievement what he went on to do in 97.
Yeah, it's obviously they've grooved their strokes around not around the racket as much, but they've been playing with the same racket and the same string setup and just getting those repetitions in, understanding exactly what to do to hit the ball in certain square of a millimeter. So to just play with a new string and a new setup for a few months before a Grand Slam tournament, it's very rare that they do these changes. Usually they take the off season and then they work with some new equipment. Maybe they try, usually it's their manufacturer, their sponsor that asks them, oh, you want to try this racket, or you want to be the ambassador of this frame, or perhaps their coach suggests something, or they feel like I need a bit more pace on my game, the way Roger did when he moved in 13-14 to a larger head size racket. So I think it's rare that they do it in a short period of time. It takes a long time to gel with a frame and a string as well. But strings are easier to play around with. We have a team last year. He was not satisfied with any of his string setups really, and he was kept on testing. He even tested from brands outside his main sponsor. So it was a bit of a weird situation. And now he's found a string that he's pretty happy with. But it took a while, and he was using different string setups from one tournament to the next. So it does happen.
Those are our participants. We will get into the 1997 French Open and then get into the final after the break. Welcome back to the Open Era podcast. We are at the 1997 French Open, and this tournament, it's 16 seeds. Dev, look at the names within these 16. There is a big block from 8 to 12, which is all Spaniards. And I guess you can count Marcelo Rios as well with that Latin flavor at number 7. This is an era of basically hard quarters, grass quarters, and specialists, because Andre Agassi refers to them as dirt ballers and dirt rats. There is a period of time in the 90s where you can make a living off a clay court, and it shows with some of the rankings at this period in time.
This is also one of the few slams where you definitely want to see Pete Sampras on your side of the draw, possibly even in the first round if you're feeling up for it. If you have an adequate game on clay, you might be able to beat him. It's rare, especially now. We look back to the 90s or 2000s, you had a guy like Pete who just was not a threat on clay, whereas today the top seeds are good everywhere. But it is a bit jarring to be like, oh yeah, Pete, first seed out in the third round, no big deal.
Also shocking here that Tim Henman dumped out in the first round. It's a pride of my nation, losing spectacularly in the opening.
You're right though. It's a Goran first round, Krajicek third round. It's not basically, unless you can really play on the clay, you're not going to spend a long time here.
I think it's a pretty interesting topic, whether this was good, that it was such a different tournament based on if you're like, let's say Pete Sampras, he wins Wimbledon 7 times, but he can't get past the first few rounds of the French Open. And compared to how it is today, whether that was good or bad, for tennis as a sport, whether it's interesting to see like Ivan Isevic, big server, he won't get past like one round, and Krajicek also serving volley, and then we have Thomas Muster who loves running around on the clay and seems to always get by,
And it really, if you think about it from that perspective, there's not a whole lot of examples in other sports where players are so specific to the things that are around them. It doesn't seem that it's not the case in basketball or in football, where you're having players who specialize in doing one thing, or a team that plays in a certain way. I think that's tactically you're probably going to get that, but it's the closest I can probably think of is something like golf, where you might have someone who is a specialist on like a links course or something like that. But
right, the course setup tailors to their game in that way, but that is always changing as well. I think tennis is pretty unique in this regard. It is. It's funny because you see, the one time Pete does make a run here, it's not like he's reinventing himself entirely. I think a lot of this was psychological as well for people who were not super adept on clay when they came up against an Alex Correia or even an Albert Costa, like guys who are not superstars by any means, but can acquit themselves very, very well on this surface. It feels like the playing ground is leveled. And it goes to Jonas's point. Like, I wonder if it would be more interesting if we had that parity back. I think we're going to get to a point where it's coming soon, so we can analyze it when it comes.
It'll be super interesting. I'm now you've said that, Jonas, I'm starting to think through my head, and so many different sort of paths are coming off in my mind about what the sport looks like if you're back in this scenario, because I think we've been so blessed to have 3 players at the top of our sport on the men's side who are capable of going on different surfaces and still playing extremely well. I do wonder whether that would have been the case if the surfaces were like they were in the 90s, whether Rafael Nadal is able to make that switch from clay to grass. I'm throwing it out there as a hypothetical situation, but I am curious to know whether or not if the modern players who have become so accustomed to surfaces which are much more neutralizing in a lot of ways, I still think there is a pretty good flavor for each surface that you're on, but whether or not the sport would benefit from it.
Yeah, I think there was a uniqueness. I mean, I'm kind of mixed up here as well. I'm not 100% sure what I believe myself, but there was something very interesting about a player, not even considering entering one of the biggest tournaments of the year just because he knows he's useless on that surface. It's something almost a bit slightly humorous about it, but it's and how that's changed. Obviously, I think tennis has improved in a wide variety of aspects. Players are faster and they hit the ball with more spin and so on. So, there's been changes due to that. So maybe it's just not the same game anymore, but it was quite fascinating to know that, okay, this guy is not going to do well. And if he did, it would be a huge upset. So you get some press around that. So that was pretty interesting.
Gustavo Kuerten is on a roll. He beats Thomas Muster in the 3rd round, which is an all-time classic. It's deserving of its own episode in its own right, and I encourage everyone to go back. I believe the French Open uploaded the highlights of that in the past month, so go and seek that one out if you can do. He beats defending champion Yevgeny Kafelnikov in the quarterfinals, and gets Philippe de Wolf, a journeyman qualifier. When was the last time you can say that a qualifier has made it from the qualifying rounds to the semi-final?
We need to go back. We need to go back to 1997 because you do not see that enough anymore. That is wild. John McEnroe talking about Philip de Wolf's bewildered. He's like, yeah, and he somehow made it to the semi-final. It's great.
Yeah, I believe he calls him a good draw, which I believe is a charitable way of saying that he didn't think he was going to be in the semi-finals. De Wolf also using Lux Salon Original, lower ranked player. It's a pretty good sideline story. Sergi Bruguera is pretty routine on his way to the final. He beats Michael Chang in the 4th round and beats a very young Patrick Rafter in the semi-finals. So that's the state of the draw. You talk about what things that would not happen in 2020 or 2019. The final stages of this draw from quarterfinals onwards looks like something from a different era. It's remarkable looking at the names, and just the fact that the highest seed remaining is the 16th seed. Pretty remarkable, isn't it, Devang?
It's wild, and the prohibitive favorite, Kafelnikov, imploded against Guga. Like, he's up 2-1, then gets bageled and loses 6-4 in the 5th set. Like, totally expected from the highest remaining seed. Anyone's tournament, really. It made for good fun, but I I wonder. I think it's sometimes glorifying the past when we consider it really was up in the air. But I don't think the quality was super great in some of these matches. If we're being honest, I thought that Mooster match probably was the best match of the tournament.
Jonas, I forgot to ask you, what are your memories of this tournament? I don't want to date you too much. You're a little older than Devang and myself. I await your ire back in my direction. But do you have memories of this tournament?
I don't really. I mean, it's let's see, I was 15, so it's yeah, it was a while ago. I used to really look forward to the French Open, especially because it used to be like, oh, it's on Eurosport, which was a huge. Which, I mean, there was no streaming, of course, so it was just like you were looking forward to this kind of event of 2 weeks of non-stop tennis, pretty much. But I don't remember watching this tournament so intently for some reason. I don't know. I wasn't watching everything, but I had some periods on and off. But it's a shame because it would have been a very interesting tournament to see. I mean, I would agree, probably looking back at some of the highlights, that some of the tennis was not fantastic. But like you said, Thomas Muster, he rarely puts off a bad performance. So that match was really, really good. So there were probably some interesting matches in there as well.
Let's get into the final. I have an open question to the group. I'll let Jonas go first, then Dev. Is this the best outfit in tennis? The outfit that Kuerten is wearing here, this Diodora outfit? I adore this thing. I love it.
Yeah, I really think it's. I'm not sure if it's the best, but it's for French Open. I think it's on the top 3 at least. I mean, then you have Wawrinka's shorts and stuff, which is more funny than good looking, but. Yeah. I definitely think this one is high up.
It's a tremendous color combination. It's an incredible fit, but just an amazing color combination, perfectly matched. The headband, the oversized headband, it looks like a bit top notch.
We have Dick Enberg and John McEnroe on commentary. John McEnroe sporting a very odd-looking goatee at the bottom of his chin. I don't know if you caught that, Devang, but it's something that we're not...
His edgy face. His edgy... He's getting ready for his talk show prime. He's ready. Yeah.
Before we get into it, we get a quick temperature check from Bud Collins. And I'm preparing you for this. This is one of the more bizarre sideline reports I think I've ever heard.
And the outfit, the blue shoes and yellow socks really pull it together. Some would regard it as crazy, but not Bud Collins.
Dick Outlandish is in, and this is the French Revolution of tennis. If Marie Antoinette were around, she wouldn't say, let him eat cake. She'd say, let him have custard pies right in the kisser, because the rabble have taken over and the royalty is gone. From Pete Sampras and Martina Hingis on down. Eva Maioli, who won yesterday, has a word for it. And of course, you'll recognize this word in your study of Serbo-Croatian. Iznenadjenja. That means big surprise. And that's what this tournament has been from beginning to end. Iznenadjenja, Dick.
All right, bud.
What the hell is he talking about? Can anyone...
Just a masterclass. I make the illusion that Pete Sampras got sent to the guillotine was my favorite part of this, in this takeover by the lower ranked seeds. That's prime Bud Collins.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we won't see that today. So I think they had like just empty headroom to go rant about whatever back then. I think it was pretty interesting. They would probably cut to commercial after like 1 minute of that. They would be like, oh, no, this is not good. Technical issues.
Moving on swiftly from whatever Bud Collins was talking about. So let's get into the match itself. And from all the matches that we talk about, or we have spoken about since COVID hit on Open Era, we tend to get fairly epic, long duels. This one is not that at all. This is a fairly straightforward demolition job from Guga. I think the first point is a pretty good summarization of what this match is. The Guga strokes are so much longer and look like he's swinging so much harder at the ball. And I think the technological changes really are helping him here, because the first point, Jonas, he blasts a forehand past Bruguera, and it really is a sign of things to come.
Yeah, I think it's very well described. I think you really see where this match is going, and sometimes from the first couple of points can tell a whole story. And that point really, part of it looks like Bruguera is not 100% fit, just how he kind of gets lost in the middle of the court and doesn't know where he's supposed to go. So might be some ankle issue, or he's been playing quite a lot of matches with recovering with that injury. But it's also a feeling that Guga is all in with his heart and his passion for it, and he's just going to go. He has nothing to lose. He's ranked 66 in the world, and then you have a champion, a former champion that seems a little bit off. So it was very clear from the first shot, and as well that if you look at the whole match, that Guga could just go for all of his shots. When you have Bruguera, he plays with a multi-filament string, and he hits with even more velocity, more spin than Kuerten, but he doesn't seem to get the same weight on his shots. It just seems to sit up a little bit easier for Kuerten.
If I had a sort of story for this match, it is exactly that. I think Bruguera's ball just sort of lands a nothing ball in the middle of the court, and it seems that Guga has sort of time to step into the court and take full swings at it. There are so many moments where, from positions that you would expect Bruguera to hit big winners or to come up with just a rally ball which puts Guga under pressure, it just sort of is safe in the middle of the court, and Kuerten just tees off on it, and that backhand, Devang, is really, really beautiful.
Epic backhand, definitely a shot I tried to model my own after, to very negative effect, but love that shot a lot. I thought Bruguera wasn't moving great. You guys mentioned the ankle problem, but his first serve was just not helping him at all. And you had Guga with the power, hitting deeper, now unloading on a lot of second serves in that first set, which clearly worked out in the Brazilians' favor.
Kuerten is someone on the backhand side who I think Justine Henin sort of looks a little bit like as well. I know that it's a little bit of a strange comparison, but the wind up that they both get, they always talk about on a single hander, and Jonas, you'll know this as well, that try and get your shoulder as far around as possible so you're staring over your right shoulder if you're a righty. If you look at some of the pictures of how far and how much Kuerten is coiled around his body to create that power, it's beautiful. There's no other way of describing it, and it's a really potent weapon in this match, because that kicking backhand into the backhand corner of Bruguera, who's got a much shorter stroke on the backhand with a two-hander, it causes him problems throughout this match, doesn't it, Jonas?
Yeah, I really like the comparison. I mean, Henin, Hardan, and Guga, they have very similar techniques on their backhand, and they're both exceptionally powerful weapons, especially that they seem to kind of really effortlessly create topspin on that shot, which is not the easiest. And it's not such a huge take back that it like takes some time out of their game. So he just seems to be able to, get ready for the stroke and time it almost perfectly all the time. He doesn't miss hit as much as Fed was doing back when he played with the 90 square inch racket, for example. So that's just a very powerful and impressive shot. It's a bit like Evan Wawrinka won his Roland Garros title, just like teeing off, but with even bigger margins.
Stats of this first set: Kuerten gets a lot of first serves in, 67-38 from Bruguera. Many, many more winners, 13 winners, 13 unforced errors. So Kuerten's going for it. Bruguera 3 winners, 7 unforced errors. Guga breaks for 3-2, and it's pretty much straight sailing from that point. Kuerten takes the first set 6-3.
Still a set point. And he's got it. Crushes that forehand right in the corner for a winner and wins the first set with 2 service breaks. 6-3. Second set action coming up.
This is an audio medium, but the scurrying around before every Bruguera shot can probably tell you that he is scrambling in a lot of these points to get the Guga shots back.
And that is evident in set 2 when he gets taken deep into games. We're talking multiple deuces. I think for the first 3 games of the second set, he gets taken to 3, 4, and 3 in terms of deuces in service games, which all of us play the differing standards, and we do not like going deep in service games. I'm sure I can speak for you, Jonas, as well when I say that having to repeatedly serve over and over again, especially when you're playing long and grueling rallies, is not particularly fun. Just a quick note, John McEnroe on commentary is talking about the transition for Guga to go from clay to grass, and he talks specifically about how he's going to struggle with those long strokes. I thought it was pretty poignant from him, and a pretty very timely thing to say, given that Kuerten really did kind of struggle on the grass courts, Devang.
Totally. I mean, just this point about McEnroe, I thought he was great in terms of his analysis in this match. And I wondered the closer he was from playing. The farther removed he was from playing, his commentary seemed to be a bit more incisive. But it was a great point. I mean, the time that Clay afforded Guga to prepare these shots was certainly different than what he would experience on the grass at Wimbledon, where I think his best result was a quarterfinal. It wasn't for him, that service and the way he played. So it was good analysis from John McEnroe, which we got throughout, which is a bit shocking, I guess, when it's 2020 and we don't usually get that all the time.
We have multiple breaks of serve, but as I mentioned, Guga is taking Bruguera deep into service games. And eventually he takes it to really sort of see out this set. John McEnroe refers on court to Bruguera pushing the ball. Jonas, is that an insult? Or is that just a reality of the fact that he's being pushed back here and is struggling with trying to get penetration on his balls?
If I know Johnny Mac well, it's a little bit of an insult for sure, but it's also kind of insightful in a way, because I think he was so late on many of the shots that he just had to resort to pushing back the ball. I mean, the ball was kicking up high. It was like quite a dry day, a hot, dry day, and the balls were just kicking up, and he couldn't deal with it. So he just ended up pushing the ball back. And the balls were landing shorter and shorter, and Guga could step in, and he was already an aggressive player, and it was easy for him then to just push Bruguera around. So it was a really tough day and matchup for Bruguera.
After a moderately competitive, but in the end fairly straightforward second set, Guga takes it 6-4.
It's out. Second set to Gustavo Kuerten. 6-4. Another break of serve.
Well, the fact that he did it on a break of serve is monumental, because not only did he grab the set, but he allows himself to start serving in the third.
Did you both notice what happened here? They went straight in, no change of ends. I absolutely love this. If there's one thing that I'd bring back, I know there's drama in the fact that players change ends and they sit down, and it gives the crowd time to sort of go crazy between the service changes. But this is amazing at the end of set two, when Bruguera sort of crestfallen at the back of the court, having lost the set, and he automatically has to return again. It's something that you definitely don't see anymore, but I thought it was a really nice little wrinkle here.
Yeah, I think it's generally nice when there's not too many interruptions in a tennis match. I mean, the toweling and bouncing the ball 60 million times before your serve, etc. It takes a lot of, I think, it takes some pace out of the game. It becomes too slow. I think it's hard for tennis then to compete with the many other sports that are far faster when it comes to the tempo. So any kind of way we can limit the time in between the action, I think is generally good. So I think this was one of them.
The third set is fairly straight sailing, other than the first game. Guga is down and has to save 2 break points. Bruguera doesn't play badly, but doesn't do enough. And I think that really is the story of this match. He just does not do enough, and Kuerten is hitting too freely to really be troubled by a lot of what's coming back from him at the other end. This set is pretty much straight sailing once the break of serve happens and Guga gets it, because Bruguera looks like he's a broken man, Devang, in the middle part of this set.
100%. And I think that was all he could really muster in terms of a pushback in that first game. Like, that was the maxing out limit that he had in the tank, based on the ankle and based on just where he was at fitness-wise, and probably where he was at mentally after the first 2 sets, where it didn't feel like he was close. But it has to be absolutely crushing to not be able to make that breakthrough in that first game, because after that, not only is it a tall mountain to climb, but I think Guga, if there was a moment for nerves, possibly in the sense that it's just going to be his first slam and he's not supposed to do this, he's 2 sets up, maybe he thinks he's kind of cruising now, he could take his foot off the gas. If there's a moment to slip, it's possibly right away to lose control of the third set, but he managed to hold on. And from there, you really get the sense that Bruguera is just going through the motions till the end.
Jonas, just one final thing before we wrap this match up. I thought the second serve was really interesting, because you can think of all the different elements that a change in technology or being able to swing more aggressively and take bigger swings and bigger strokes at rally balls, how that changes the game. But I thought the way that Kuerten went after the second serve for Bruguera was a huge thing in this match because the strokes are long and Bruguera's just kind of rolling second serves in, which Kuerten tees off on. And I think that's the thing that we tend to forget. Like there are multiple facets to what happens when we change technology, and it affects just about every single stroke. And I thought return of serve, especially on second serve, was a huge thing in this match.
Yeah, for sure. And he felt so free that he could just blast the ball. Also, I think Bruguera's serves, especially second serves, obviously were really sitting up. And I think he would have really, been helped by using like a Babolat Aero Pro Drive Pure Aero and polyester strings. I think he would have loved that, because it really, he needs to hold back a little bit, not to get the balls to sail too long with those strings that move. And he can't get the same, topspin on his serves either. So it's just there. And also, I think Guga is also taller, so he can just step into the ball and just take it on the rise. And it's really no chance. It really looked like two players of a different caliber, right?
Once Guga breaks for 4-2, it's pretty much straight sailing. Bruguera is completely broken at that point. Gustavo Kuerten wins the third set 6-2, and he's the 1997 French Open champion.
The tennis world knows him now. Gustavo Kuerten, 66 in the world. A losing record this year coming to Paris, and now the French Open champion. 6-3, 6-4, 6-2 over two-time champion Sergi Bruguera. Unbelievable effort from this young Brazilian. Made it look easy today against Bruguera. 3 5-setters. Out of his 7 matches won, and we got a new hero in men's tennis.
As Johnny Mac said, he did make it look easy, and we'll wrap this one up when we come back after the break. Welcome back to the Open Era podcast. Gustavo Kuerten becomes the first unseeded player since Mats Wilander in 1982 to win a Grand Slam. He also moved up to 15 in the world rankings following this from 66. Very funny story. He received the French Open trophy from Bjorn Borg, and Guillermo Vilas. Vilas whispered something in his ear during the presentation ceremony, which Kuerten would not reveal what it was because he said it would be uncouth or worse to that effect. It was picked up by the press at the time. He said in Spanish, something akin to "Get ready, kid, it's going to be raining women onto your lap," which is very funny and a very Vilas thing to say. Dev, what are your overall memories of Kuerten, given we know what his career looked like, and given that he went on to win this title 2 more times after this? He's a legend in the sport, is he not?
He is, and I perhaps if you looked at his CV, that wouldn't be readily apparent. Just looking from the stats, but I felt his personality, the way he operated was bigger than maybe his accolades on the court, which were many. I mean, this is a guy who won the Tennis Masters Cup in 2000. He wasn't incapable of playing on hard courts or making a run on the grass. I think he got to a quarterfinal at Wimbledon, but I think the character he was, the way he played, the style he played with, it got a lot of people interested at that time in the game. I think he was different than a lot of the other players. In what was, I mean, we mentioned the specialists and the variety. There was a lot of variety at this time, but I think a lot of variety of the same sort of player, and I don't think Guga necessarily fit into any of those molds. I don't know if you guys agree with that.
Yeah, his style was quite fresh, I would say, and it didn't fit into kind of, this is a clay court or a grass court player or something. I mean, it actually looks, touching on a thing we talked about before, it looks like he could, move his game towards faster surfaces. I mean, he did win Master Series on hard court, so it doesn't look like it's crazy to expect him to be able to adapt to grass courts, but perhaps the grass had not changed enough for him to do that, because he has this really flowing, aggressive, effortless game that should work technically on all surfaces today, I think.
I think it's a strange comp, but I'm going to go there and see if you guys agree with me. We mentioned Dominic Thiem. I kind of see a little bit of it, just the sort of stringy, big, big, long strokes on both forehand and backhand. I know technically on the forehand side, it's a little different in terms of how they're hitting the ball, but it seems play style wise, not overwhelming power that Kuerten has the same way that Thiem has on the tennis court, and just short, pure speed of the ball off the string bed. But I sort of see a little bit of that, Dev. Am I wrong? I possibly am wrong on that one.
I in a little way, in the way that the shot preparation and how deep he would hit, I can see it. I think the body types are a bit different, maybe, and that's why I'm having a hard time seeing it. But I can see the mythology as well behind some of what Dominic Thiem does. I feel like Guga operated in the same way. I think, as Jonas said, I would love to see what Guga would do today with how the courts are set up, how basically generally everything is faster, and with the technology that's available today, I think he is one of those players that would have slotted into the conversation nicely, especially where I think there's a bit of a gap in the tour right now, not just in talent, but I think in a bit of the variety that we had back then, where there was guys that played differently, whereas now maybe it's a bit easier to slot people into boxes.
No, I completely agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely agree. I think there's some similarities in a way, in the way that they both play aggressively, but with good margins. So and they can manage to generate topspin off of both wings. But obviously, I think in terms of kind of passion and leaving their heart out on the court, I mean, Dominic Thiem is a little bit robotic. He's pretty easy guy to get behind, but not the easiest. And you have a guy like Guga that really won the hearts of the crowd and has this kind of infectious smile. And I think that's the kind of character difference. And what I personally am missing from a lot of tennis today is bringing more of your personality out on court. Perhaps they can't do that because of they have to act a certain way, they can't swear and so on. But it's something that I miss a little bit, that they can just go and show who they really are on court, and more like a show. Today it's very professional and can be a bit, two-dimensional at times.
You're preaching to the choir on that one. We've been banging that drum ever since Open Era began. We're desperate for some personality on this tour. And I think we touched on Nick Kyrgios this past week when we did an episode on him, and someone who is living and breathing personality. And we're just desperate for some more of that in our sport.
I'm curious if you guys, Sergei Bruguera, a victim of history, perhaps? I mean, he really isn't talked about a lot, like you mentioned, Bush, but I wonder if that was just, you had a couple guys in the 90s who racked up 2 or 3 slams, but really not considered or not thought of when the game went forward. And you see the parade of legends that are usually around at the slams, and you see random players or maybe less heralded players, but I feel like Bruguera is less mentioned than he should be.
I think he is as well, and I'm curious to get Jonas's take on this one. We mentioned off the top, and there's a famous sort of Tennis Warehouse post about this, about the revolutions that someone like Bruguera gets on his shots, that he hits with as many RPMs as someone like Rafael Nadal, which is, stupid amounts of spin that he gets on the ball. You do get the feeling that if he was in today's era with the racket technology, you mentioned something like an AeroPro drive and maybe a really stiff string like an RPM Blast, something produced ultra slick and ultra spinny string. I do wonder whether or not he would have been like an all-time great on a clay court, just in a different era, because he had all the things that were necessary. He could play defensively, he could play aggressively, and he had that weapon which a lot of other players don't have, with the amount of spin that he could generate. I'm curious to know, Jonas, do you think that he would have been seamless in the transition if he played in 2019, 2020?
I think, I think he's one of those players that when you watch him play now, it's weird that he's kind of back then when he didn't get, he got obviously nice results from his game, but today he would fit in really well because he generates massive topspin. He doesn't make any mistakes, hardly at all. That's why he's one of those like 3 bagel sets, that a player like that, like Rafa, that just doesn't give anything away. So with the new technology, the slowing down of grass courts and hard courts, I think he would have done really well if we had kind of fast forwarded his career and / life 10 years, So it's very interesting, and it's a shame that he gets forgotten. Perhaps, he was a bit media shy. That's what I've heard, and I think he just liked to stay, out of the spotlight. So perhaps that's why he's not as talked about. Because if someone won 3 Grand Slams today, like a Wawrinka, I mean, it's already a legend. In our modern media era, we just it's fantastic. It's like so difficult to win a slam, especially with the 3 goats around. But it's still amazing that you can have a 3 Grand Slam winner and people kind of don't know who he is. That's it's weird.
Just to round out on Guga as well, only Mark Edmondson ranked 212th and Goran Ivanisevic ranked 125th were ranked lower than Kuerten when winning a Grand Slam singles title. I was certain in my head that Gaston Gaudio was lower than 66 in 2004, but I was wrong. Devang, pop quiz time. Let's test your knowledge. Where do you think Gaston Gaudio was ranked when he won the French Open in 2004?
Was it 44?
How do you know that? How do you know that off the top of your head? That's
Was it right?
That is correct.
Is that right? Is it 44?
Scary.
During this COVID time, guys, I've been going down some dark wormholes in tennis YouTube, and I've watched some matches, but 44 is etched in my brain. So
that's cool.
Yes.
That's a good stat.
Let's close on. Let's do 2 more things. Let's round out Bergera and Kuerten in the things that they share in common, which is defeating Roger Federer and breaking his heart at different points. Because I think both of them on a clay court can do silly things to one of the greatest players of all time. And that is very true in 2004 when Kuerten beat Roger Federer. I have strong memories of this match. I strongly, this is the period in time which I was an enormous Roger Federer fan and fully had the expectation going to every single match that he was playing that he was going to wipe the floor with his opponent. It's an incredible story, just the way that Kuerten dealt with him in 2004. And going back and watching some of the highlights, that one's also been uploaded on the French Open YouTube page and is well worth going and checking out. Jonas, that one lives as an all-time great performance, and someone who Federer was at the peak of his powers in 2004, and Kuerten really gave him a lesson in how to play clay court tennis at that period in time.
Yeah, I heard that Fed was quite devastated after that match because he realized how much he had to work to be able to be close to winning the French Open, because he thought he was a pretty decent clay court player, pretty decent being top 10, top 5 in his style. But it really showed how much he had to learn before he could really, make it to a final there. I mean, it didn't take long for him because he has this, God-given talent, whatever. But it was quite impressive the way Kuerten came and just showed him who's boss still, So it's, but I think these kind of experiences for Fed was just a push to, get him to work even harder, and that's the reason he became who he became.
Totally. And Bergera defeated Federer 6-1, 6-1. It's still one of the worst results Federer's ever had. I believe it is the worst number of games lost he's had in his career at the 2000 Barcelona Open. Federer's probably like 17 at this period of time, so probably no great shame, but it does go to show you that these two masters on a clay court, even for one of the all-time greats, can completely and utterly rinse and, let's be honest, mildly humiliate one of the greatest evers on a clay court. And that one, Devang, probably shows how good Bergera was even in 2000 on that surface.
When he's really close to the end. I think that ankle issue really never went away after it flared back up in 97. He managed to play a few more years, but he was really hobbled by that. But he started a tennis academy. I think his influence on the game is still pretty prominent. I just wanted to, my parting shot, Guga Kuerten was for me like one of the guys I loved growing up because of, like Jonas mentioned, the personality and the way it looked like he was having so much fun playing. It made me want to play tennis, made me want to pick up a racket. So it was really fun to look back on this because he was a player I enjoyed to watch immensely. And I think even in that time when Fed was coming along and I started probably gravitating more towards him, if Guga was playing, I would always still back this guy, because I think in terms of tennis, we've said it a bunch of times, but boy, we could use more personalities like his in the game today, because it is an infectious guy and he made everything he was doing fun.
Couldn't agree with you more. Just to round out the technological side of this, Jonas, you can't say a whole lot has changed since 1997. Maybe you can say that some of the polyester strings have gotten a little softer. Maybe you can say that things like maybe not round polyesters, but you have shaped polyester strings, which give more spin. But And then maybe hybrid stringing, you would argue, as another technological change, which you mentioned Federer and Novak use as well, and Andy Murray. But really, in 1997, you wouldn't say a whole lot's changed. I saw they re-released a version. I think this is right. You're going to correct me. I'm going up against someone who I know is going to correct me on this one. But the racket that Kuerten used, they re-released a different version of it very recently. Is that correct? Is it the Pro Tour?
Yeah, they had Pro Tour. They call it now 2.0. Back when Kuerten was using it, it was called the 630 in Europe and 2.8 in the US. And it's used by players like Murray uses it, but under various paint jobs. So they paint it to look like the latest model all the time. So they sell more rackets. It's pretty well known, but it's not maybe generally known by the tennis fan, you know. And that's racket been around. I mean, you have Alexei Popyrin, who's like a 20-year-old top 50 player. He actually uses that racket in an open string pattern. So it's a almost 30-year-old racket that they're using today. So to answer your question, racket technology has not changed a huge deal. I mean, you're seeing some advancements that they're trying to create, like thicker beam frames that can generate some power, but they're still supposed to be pretty arm friendly, because when you get a really thick beam, you're going to send some rapid vibrations down your arm and your wrist. And a lot of players get tennis elbow because they play with a stiff racket and a stiff string to control all that power from the racket. So they're trying to find a middle ground of that. But it's not been a huge change. The first Pure Drive came out around this time, and that's still kind of the defining racket of this time we're living in now. The Pure Drive became the Aero Pro Drive, and the Pure Aero that Rafa uses, and one of the best-selling rackets of all time. And they're still trying to kind of perfect that racket today, but it's just very, very minor changes and nothing groundbreaking at all.
Yes, absolutely. Devang, any other closing thoughts that you have on this one?
You've been throwing trivia at me repeatedly, so I will end with Guga made his deepest run, his final deep run at the 2004 French Open, where he lost in the quarterfinals. Can you tell me who he lost to? Which year was it? This is the 2004, of course. 2004, so this is the Gaudio year, of course. So that's the hint.
He lost in the quarterfinals. Okay, I can do this. So Coria made the semifinals. No, Coria made the final, didn't he? He played Gaudio in the final.
Correct. Tim Henman was the other semifinalist.
That's right. Yeah, I was gonna say Henman made the semifinals that year because he made the semifinals of the US Open as well in the same year. David Ferrer, maybe? Ferrer must have made it pretty far in that year as well.
Off by only one name. Mr. Nalbandian beat him in the quarters that year. So it was 3 Argentines, right, in that semi, and 3 Argentines and Tim Henman in the semi. The Falklands War Redux. Falklands are back.
Goodness me. I feel ashamed. We're banning the podcast, or ending the podcast with my lack of trivia.
It's good. That was my final thought was meant to expose you. So I've done my job.
Jonas, thank you very much for joining us this week. Where can everyone find you? And is there anything you want to shout out?
Well, I really enjoyed it. That's my shout out. But if you want to read more about racket strings and other things tennis related, you can check out tennisnerd.net, which is my website. And there's a YouTube channel and Instagram with Tennisnerd as well. So that's what you need to remember from this if you're interested. I'm trying to vary the types of content, but a lot of it is racket strings and kind of gear stuff.
Perfect. Make sure you give Jonas a follow. Tennisnerd is incredibly interesting.
It's awesome. It's awesome stuff.
I'm always learning new things. Thank you, everyone, for listening to us this week. A rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast downloads is hugely appreciated. You can join us on patreon.com/openera for $3 a month. We hugely appreciate any support that we get on there. You can also join our Discord channel to chat about the various different things that are happening in the ATP and WTA tours at the moment. There's still things going on despite the COVID lockdown. Thanks, everyone. We will talk to you soon.